The moment I heard Craig Berube describe Mitch Marner as the Maple Leafs' emotional leader, I knew this wasn't going to be just another offseason headline. It wasn't because Berube criticized Auston Matthews. He didn't. It was because of what his comments implied, and that's where this story is completely taken off. Here's what I'm hearing. Around the league, people aren't debating whether Auston Matthews is an elite player. That conversation was settled years ago. The debate now is something entirely different. It's about leadership. More specifically, it's about whether the captain of one of hockey's biggest franchises has been leading in the way the organization needs. And that's why this story has become so fascinating. When Berube looked back on last season, he said the Maple Leafs lost their emotional leader when Mitch Marner left. Those words spread quickly across the hockey world. He didn't say they lost their best player. He didn't say they lost their captain. He said they lost their emotional leader. That distinction matters. From what I've been told, coaches don't throw around language like that casually. They spend every day inside the locker room. They see the conversations fans never hear. They see who keeps the energy up after a tough practice. They see who speaks between periods. They know who challenges teammates when things aren't going well. According to Berube, that player was Mitch Marner. Almost immediately, the conversation shifted toward Auston Matthews. If Marner was the emotional heartbeat of the team, what does that mean for the captain? That's the question that exploded across hockey media. Sports media personality Sid Seixeiro took that discussion even further. His reaction wasn't really about attacking Matthews as a player. Instead, he questioned the leadership structure inside the Maple Leafs organization. His point was simple. If the emotional leadership belonged to someone other than the captain, then maybe the organization had a bigger issue than anyone realized. Here's how I read this situation. I don't think Berube intended to create controversy. I think he was simply describing what he experienced behind closed doors. But once those comments became public, they took on a life of their own. Fans started connecting dots. Analysts started debating leadership styles. Suddenly, every conversation about the Maple Leafs became less about goals and assists and more about the culture inside the locker room. The latest information I'm hearing is that people around the league aren't shocked that Marner carried a vocal leadership role. In fact, many have viewed him that way for years. Teammates and coaches have often praised his energy, his communication, and the way he stayed engaged throughout games and practices. But that's where another important point gets overlooked. Being the emotional leader and being the captain are not always the same job. I've covered enough hockey to know that every successful team has different personalities inside its leadership group. Sometimes the captain is the loudest voice in the room. Sometimes he's the calmest. Sometimes another veteran naturally becomes the emotional spark while the captain leads through preparation, consistency, and performance. That's why I think this debate deserves a little more context. Nobody questions Auston Matthews' commitment to hockey. Nobody questions his work ethic. Nobody questions his ability to perform under enormous pressure over the course of an NHL season. The criticism is much narrower than that. People are asking whether Matthews' leadership style fits what Toronto has needed during some of its most difficult moments. That's a fair hockey conversation. It isn't the same as saying Matthews has failed as captain. Still, perception matters. When a former head coach publicly says another player was the emotional leader, it's inevitable that attention turns toward the captain. Here's what makes this especially interesting to me. Matthews hasn't responded publicly to any of this. He hasn't criticized Berube. He hasn't pushed back against the media discussion. He hasn't tried to defend himself through interviews. Instead, he's remained silent while everyone else debates his leadership. From what I've been told, that actually reflects Matthews' personality. Throughout his career, he's generally preferred letting his game speak louder than public statements. That's not unusual. Some of the NHL's greatest players have led exactly that way. But here's the challenge. Silence often creates space for other voices, and that's exactly what's happened. Analysts, former players, fans, radio hosts, television personalities, everyone suddenly has an opinion about what kind of captain Auston Matthews is. My take is that this debate has grown larger because of everything the Maple Leafs have gone through over the last year. If Toronto had just won the Stanley Cup, nobody would be dissecting leadership comments from the offseason. Winning has a way of ending almost every debate, but disappointment changes everything. When expectations aren't met, people begin searching for explanations. Some point to roster construction, others blame coaching decisions, others focus on goaltending. And now leadership has entered that conversation in a very public way. Here's another detail I think deserves attention. Berube didn't simply compliment Marner's talent. He specifically praised his energy, his communication, and his ability to keep teammates engaged. Those qualities don't always show up on the score sheet, but coaches notice them every single day. League sources have long suggested that Marner was one of the more vocal personalities inside Toronto's room. That doesn't diminish Matthews. It simply highlights that leadership responsibilities were shared differently than many fans may have assumed. The problem is that public perception rarely deals in nuance. People hear the phrase emotional leader, and they immediately wonder why the captain wasn't described that way. That's why this story has become so compelling. I'm also hearing from people around hockey that leadership itself is evolving. The old stereotype of a captain giving fiery speeches every intermission doesn't always match today's NHL. Modern leadership can look much quieter. It can come from preparation, accountability, and daily professionalism instead of constant speeches. Matthews has often been described in exactly those terms. He's respected because of how he prepares. He's respected because of his commitment to improving. He's respected because teammates know what they're getting from him every day. But the question now being asked is whether that's enough when a team faces adversity. Here's how I see it. The criticism surrounding Matthews isn't really about one comment from Craig Berube. It's about years of playoff disappointment, enormous expectations, and a franchise still searching for the breakthrough its fans have waited decades to see. When a team falls short often enough, every aspect of the organization comes under scrutiny. Eventually, that includes the captain. And once Berube publicly identified Marner as the emotional leader, the spotlight shifted directly onto Matthews in a way that few people saw coming. Now, here's where I think this story becomes even more interesting, because once the initial headlines faded, the conversation stopped being about Craig Berube's words and started becoming about the future of the Maple Leafs. Here's what I'm hearing. People around the league believe this organization is entering one of the most important leadership transitions it has faced in years. Mitch Marner is no longer part of the picture, and whether fans agreed with Berube or not, his comments reinforced one thing. Someone has to fill the emotional void that he believes now exists. Naturally, all eyes turn to Auston Matthews. That's simply the reality of wearing the C in Toronto. There may not be a more demanding hockey market in the NHL. Every interview is analyzed, every playoff loss is dissected, every decision made by the captain becomes part of the public conversation. From what I've been told, players understand that pressure when they sign in Toronto, but understanding it and living through it are two very different things. Matthews has experienced that pressure for years. He's carried the expectations of an Original Six franchise. He's become one of the NHL's premier goal scorers. He's won major individual awards. Yet despite all of that, the team has continued searching for the playoff breakthrough that both the organization and its fans desperately want. That's why leadership keeps coming back into the conversation. My take is that it's too easy to reduce leadership to one personality trait. Some fans expect a captain to be loud, others expect him to challenge teammates publicly, others simply want their captain to perform when the games matter most. The truth is, successful teams often have several different leaders filling different roles. That's why I don't think Berube's comments should automatically be viewed as criticism of Matthews. At the same time, I completely understand why they spark debate. Imagine hearing your former head coach say another player was the emotional leader of the team. Whether intentional or not, that immediately changes how people look at the captain. That's exactly what happened here. The latest information I'm hearing is that many people inside hockey still view Matthews as one of the league's most respected players. His preparation, his commitment to improving, and his consistency have earned admiration throughout the NHL. None of that suddenly disappears because of one interview, but perception matters in professional sports, and perception can change quickly. That's why I believe the next season is going to be incredibly important for Matthews, not because he suddenly has something to prove as a goal scorer, but because every aspect of his leadership will now be watched more closely than ever. People will notice how he interacts with teammates. They'll notice post-game interviews. They'll notice body language during difficult stretches. Fair or unfair, that's what happens when questions about leadership become public. Here's another angle that I think often gets overlooked. Leadership isn't tested when everything is going well. It's tested when things start going wrong. During winning streaks, almost every locker room looks united. Real leadership shows itself during losing streaks, after difficult playoff exits, or when expectations begin turning into criticism. That's exactly where the Maple Leafs have found themselves over the past several seasons. From what I've been told, organizations often learn more about their leaders during adversity than during success. That makes the coming season especially intriguing. Without Mitch Marner in the room, there won't be the same leadership dynamic Craig Berube described. Someone else will naturally become more vocal. Maybe that's Matthews. Maybe another veteran steps into that space. Maybe leadership becomes even more shared than it already was.